What's a really cool historical fact you know? On multiple occasions Stalin sent assassins to kill Tito. All of them failed. Tito then wrote a telegram to Stalin. They have all failed. If you do not desist, I will send one assassin. He will not fail. Stalin desisted. In 1913 Hitler, Trotsky, Tito, Freud and Stalin were all living in Vienna at the same time. Juan Pujol Garcia was a Spanish double agent working for the Allies during World War II. He was so good at his job that he managed to earn a medal from both sides. He received the Iron Cross from Germany and became a member of the Order of the British Empire. Gandhi and Churchill were both present at the same battle in South Africa during the Boer War. Gandhi was a volunteer stretcher bearer and Churchill was a reporter. Battle of Spinekop. Pope Gregory IX declared that cats were associated with the devil and had them exterminated across Europe. It's believed that the disappearance of cats helped rats proliferate and spread the bubonic plague. The katana, the famous sword of the Japanese samurai, was never an important military weapon. Samurai went into battle armed with bows or polearms. Swords were just backup weapons. The katana didn't become prominent until the Edo period, when the country was unified under one ruler and warfare between samurai had ceased. The katana was primarily a status symbol, valued because only members of the samurai class were allowed to carry them. The major world leaders of WWI were all cousins. Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, King George V of England, and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. Tsar Nicholas and King George even looked really similar to each other. Side note: Kaiser and Tsar are titles that are both translations of the word Caesar. The Argentine government under military dictatorship in the 80s would take people that spoke out against them, raid their homes, take them into custody, strip them, drug them, and toss them out of a plane over the Atlantic Ocean. They would be considered missing or disappeared. The total number is about 30,000. Their mothers started protesting on Thursdays in front of the president's office. They still have the protest meetings. But about other things now. There were tons of rabbits living in the Berlin Wall. In reality, the wall was made of several walls, fences separated by a strip of no man's land running all the way around West Berlin. Because no natural predators could get in, their population flourished. Have said this before. Still awesome. In 1886, Liechtenstein went to war for the last time. They sent 80 soldiers. They returned with 81 because the soldiers made a friend. Julius Caesar was once captured by pirates for ransom. During this time he befriended the pirates and would even play games with them. He joked that once he was freed he would return and crucify every one of them. After his ransom was paid and he was free, he quickly amassed a small army and returned to the pirates. He then ordered them to be crucified, which they were. Charlie Chaplin entered a Charlie Chaplin look-alike competition in San Francisco. He lost. Dolly Parton entered a celebrity look-alike contest as herself once and lost her man. Winston Churchill would put a thin metal rod in his cigars so the ash wouldn't fall. He would use it as a distraction during debates so his opponent would be distracted as the ash got longer and use it to point. The Kentucky Meat Shower. The 3rd of March. 1876 in Bath County, Kentucky. What appeared to be flakes of red meat fell from the sky. People tasted it and said it seemed to be mutton or venison. Others said it may have been bear meat. The most widely accepted theory seems to be that it was carrion, vomited up by buzzards passing over. People tasted it. Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini were all nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. That prize really mean nothing, eh? Anyone can be nominated. Winning counts for something. Humans weren't familiar with the concept of extinction until the fur trade wiped out most of the sea otters in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. They just thought the animals went to an undiscovered corner of the world. Russian did not become an official language in the Soviet Union until 1990. English is also not the official language of the United States. Cleopatra spoke 9 different languages and was the first member of the Ptolemaic dynasty to actually speak Egyptian. When she found out Caesar was besieged in Alexandria, she paid a Latin man to smuggle her down the Nile. And then she rolled herself into a carpet and had him smuggle her into the parts of the city under Roman control. He was allowed in as he spoke perfect Latin. He managed to get himself in front of Caesar, at which point he unrolled the carpet and out popped Cleopatra, who hadn't been able to bathe in 9 days yet still charmed the pants toga off Caesar, literally. I forget all their names because they were Chinese, but there was this general who was severely outnumbered by enemy forces approaching a village he was in. He only had like 10 of his men in the village compared to the 50,000 that were on their way to kill him. He then went out onto a pedestal looking thing with his favorite instrument and played it. He played it as if he was calm as can be. When the enemy forces saw this man alone, playing music as if there wasn't an army there to kill him, they sheet their pants and ran away. The most baddest bluff of all time. In Rome, mocking of those in power was a long-standing tradition. Julius Caesar was mocked for a time by being called the Queen of Bithynia because of his rumored homosexual relationship with King Nicomedes IV of Bithynia. This was not mocking him being a homosexual. The Romans really didn't care if you were gay. They mocked him because he was the supposed receiver in the relationship. So it was okay to be a homosexual in Rome. Just don't be the bottom. In 1942, at the height of the Second World War, a war of survival for Britain, with all the attendant expense of full mobilization of the nation's entire economy to fight the Germans you might expect, the government deemed it necessary to buy every bit of tea available in the entire world, from everywhere except Japan, with whom they were at war. Maintaining a steady supply of tea for both serving troops and the home front was so vital to morale that this expense couldn't be dodged. A flood of molasses killed 21 in Boston in 1919. In Rome, one of the few surviving legal documents we have is a case where a woman is suing her daughter's Krilla. Not because he killed her. The dead girl was a prostitute and the man was a citizen. But rather for lost income from the girl's prostitution. The dead girl had been paying her mother's bills and gotten killed by a John. So now the John has to pay the mother each month to support her as her daughter would have. In medieval Italy, Catherine Sforza was leading a besieged town. When the besiegers threatened her children, she lifted her dress and yelled back that she could make more, while displaying the tools to do so. Switzerland invaded Liechtenstein several times by accident. Andre the Giant once drank 119 beers in one sitting, 6 hours. That's a pace just shy of 1 beer every 3 minutes. Hiroyo Onoda, a Japanese soldier in WWII, did not surrender until 1974. Oscar Wilde had the best last words ever. When he was on his deathbed in his home, he looked at the wallpaper and said, "That wallpaper is hideous. Either it goes or I do." Bam. Dead. We don't know Albert Einstein's last words. He said them in German to an English-speaking nurse. My grandfather was on one of the teams developing the floppy disk. It's not called floppy because it's soft and flexible. It is because you used to have to flip it manually. Flip-flop. Or so my dad told me. Grandpa died when I was 3. Cannot confirm. A black slave was given to a Japanese daimyo as a gift. Convinced it was a trick, he ordered for the slave to be scrubbed clean. Later, that slave would join the daimyo's court as not only a free man, but as a samurai. Manhattan is part of the United States because the old British colonial government traded with the Netherlands in exchange for Suriname. Daniel Boone was captured by Indians. They were making him accompany them to Boonesboro, which they planned to attack. Boone escaped to warn Boonesboro and ran barefoot 160 miles across the wilderness in 4 days. He outran the Indians on horseback through the ducking wilderness with no food, no shoes, and a pack of Indians on his ass. Total badass. At the same time JFK was shot in Dallas, Walt Disney was in a helicopter over Central Florida. scoping out locations for a new theme park. Or he quickscoped JFK. Leading up to World War II, the French were very ill prepared for the type of war they needed to fight. The majority of the strategies and maneuvers the French army practiced involved invading another country or being the aggressor. They were not prepared for being the defender because they had never simulated being on the defensive. There were other contributing factors to them being ill-prepared. But the above is probably the most significant reason Germany rolled through the French army and into Paris with little resistance. Andrew Jackson was the first president to have a serious assassination attempt. A man pulled a pistol on Jackson. It misfired. Andrew Jackson proceeded to lay the smack down on the would-be assassin, attacking him with his cane. The man pulled a second pistol, and it also misfired. The odds of two misfiring pistols are 1,125,000. Jackson broke several of the man's ribs and had to be pulled off him. The Spanish flu actually got its start in Kansas, USA. It's only called the Spanish flu because most countries involved in WWI had a near-universal propaganda machine that only allowed good news to be published. Spain, which was involved in a civil war at the time, had one of the only free press in the world. They then were the only ones reporting on the massive deaths caused by the flu, and led the rest of the world to believe that they were the source greatest affected. In fact, the death rate was near universal, and destroyed some entire cities' communities in the US and Canada. Specifically those of Inuit First Nation communities. Get me drunk, and I could talk about the 1918 flu epidemic for hours. John Quincy Adams was once given a pet alligator by Marquis de Lafayette. He actually kept it in a White House for a little while. After Beethoven went deaf, he found he could affix a metal rod to his piano and bite down on it to hear the vibrations of the piano perfectly. In ancient Rome, there was an act of revolt known as the secessions of the plebeians, in which the commoners would evacuate an entire city and leave the elites to fend for themselves. The second officer of the Titanic stayed aboard the ship to help others off until he became trapped underwater. A boiler explosion then set him free and he went on to serve in WWII and rescued an additional 120 men at Dunkirk. The Great Whiskey Fire of Dublin in 1875 resulted in the deaths of 13 people. None were killed in the actual flame, but rather from alcohol poisoning after they drank the whiskey flowing through the streets. Diogenes, an ancient Greek philosopher, noticed a prostitute's son throwing rocks into a crowd and said, "Careful, son. Don't hit your father." Teddy Roosevelt once chased down a cougar that was being attacked by a pack of dogs. Teddy jumped in between the pack of dogs and cougar and used his knife to stab the cougar through the heart. A volcanic eruption caused a year without a summer. Some scientists suggest that the Little Ice Age in Europe, 1500-1750, was caused by dropping CO2 levels due to massive and sudden reforestation of the Americas after the natives had been wiped out by new diseases. Source: during WW2 in the Atlantic, because of a steel shortage, the UK military was seriously considering a proposal to make aircraft carriers out of mostly ice and use them against the German subs. I shit you not. They later decided against it, but not for the obvious reasons you would think. Project Habakkuk.